Hi everyone and welcome back to 360 Recaps. Today we'll be recapping Murder on the Orient Express. Our story begins in Israel as Detective Hercule Poirot requires two perfect matching eggs for breakfast, but the local chief of police reminds him he must go solve a theft that has happened at the Wailing Wall. The accused are a rabbi, an imam, and a priest, one of which has stolen a holy artifact. In a surprise turn of events, Poirot deduces that the culprit is actually the police officer who has hired him to solve the case. After working for months without rest, Poirot heads to Istanbul for vacation. While en route he meets Mary Davenham, a governess with a focus on geography for her students. He also meets Dr. Arbuthnot, a physician who must urgently get to London. The two are spotted having a clandestine conversation. Mary proclaims that when all of this is over, no one would be able to touch them. Poirot reaches Istanbul and is seen admiring the baking of his favorite chef. While in the kitchen he encounters one of his best friend's book, a rich socialite who is being paid by his wealthy uncle to stay far away from their family's home offices. He is paid well to chauffeur rich passengers back and forth on their train, the Orient Express. While the two friends catch up, a UK official interrupts their conversation and requests that Detective Poirot travel to London to solve a case. Book secures a cabin on the Orient Express for Poirot and the two are off. Poirot is joined by other passengers. Mrs. Hubbard, a wealthy socialite. Princess Natalie Dragomiroff and her assistant. Businessman Edward Ratchet, his valet Mr. Masterman, and his secretary Mr. McQueen. As the train leaves Istanbul, Mr. Ratchet receives a threatening letter from someone. He asks Mr. Masterman if he knows who sent it, but his valet doesn't know. Mr. Ratchet then attempts to flirt with Mrs. Hubbard, who turns down his advances. Poirot overhears their conversation, but Mrs. Hubbard says it's nothing. Poirot joins Book for lunch the next day, who tells him about the passengers on board. After all the guests leave, Mr. Ratchet approaches Poirot and informs him that he believes he is being targeted due to past fraudulent business deals. He offers to pay Detective Poirot large sums of money to protect him, but the detective turns him down, telling him that he puts criminals away, he does not protect them. Ratchet then threatens Poirot, but the detective is unafraid and tells him that if he has defrauded other criminals, he must suffer the consequences. That night he hears a disturbance in Ratchet's cabin. When he goes to investigate, he sees a woman fleeing in a red nightgown. Before he can investigate further, the train is derailed by an avalanche during a thunderstorm. Everyone gathers in the main car and Book calms them by telling them that when they don't reach their destination, a rescue team will be dispatched to dig them out. Mr. Masterman then delivers Mr. Ratchet his breakfast, only to find him stabbed to death in his cabin. Poirot, Book, and Dr. Arbuthnot are called to investigate. They see he has been stabbed wildly and that he died between midnight and 2:00 a.m. Let's take a break for a moment. Do you like true crime? Play an interactive true crime-inspired murder mystery game where you get to search the victim's room by clicking on items and watching scenes of her life. Based on a true story, solve the murder of this young woman.
What happened? Who did this to me?
Just click on the link in the description to play this free game. Now back to the film. When Dr. Arbuthnot reports that he died between midnight and 2 a.m., the guard informs him that he was on duty and that he saw no one during those times. Book asks him to solve the case. Poirot initially refuses because he is on vacation, but Book tells him that someone innocent may be blamed by the local police. Poirot agrees to solve the murder and begins questioning the guests. Mr. McQueen is questioned first and tells them that he has been working as Mr. Ratchet's secretary and business manager for close to a year now, even though he is classically trained as a lawyer. He reveals that Mr. Ratchet was incompetent, rude, and had lots of enemies, and that someone had been sending him threatening letters. After interviewing him, Poirot examines the body and finds that someone had drugged him with barbital, which is why there was no struggle while being murdered. Poirot collects evidence from his room and finds a handkerchief with the letter H on it. Poirot takes a closer look at the death threats sent to Ratchet and finds hidden messages. As a strong blood is on your hands, you will die. Poirot comes to the realization that the murdered man's real name was not Edward Ratchet, but Cassetti. Years ago, a man by the name of Colonel Armstrong and his wife underwent the tragedy of having their daughter kidnapped. Colonel Armstrong contacted Poirot to find his daughter, but by the time Poirot received the message, his daughter Daisy had been murdered by the kidnapper, Cassetti. The news devastated his pregnant wife, who lost her life along with the baby. Colonel Armstrong then died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It appears as though someone wanted revenge on Cassetti and took his life. The question is who on the train committed the murder. He questions Mrs. Hubbard again and asks if he knew about the Daisy Armstrong case, and she says the extent of her knowledge was what she heard about it in the news. She does, however, tell him that she believes that someone broke into her room to get to Cassetti's cabin because there was a security guard button left on her floor. Poirot then questions Mr. Masterman, Pilar Estravado, a traveling missionary, Mr. Hardman, a professor of engineering, and Mr. Marquise, an Italian automobile dealer, but cannot make a breakthrough. He speaks to Mary and asks her about Cassetti, but outside of the trip, she didn't know him. He then asks her about her relationship with Dr. Arbuthnot and their conversation on the ferry, but she denies knowing anything. Poirot then questions Princess Natalie Dragomirov. She reveals that she admired Sonia Armstrong's mother as an actress and was godmother to Daisy Armstrong, but that it was a coincidence that she was on board with Daisy's killer. Poirot then interrogates the princess assistant, but in German, so that the princess cannot understand. Her assistant reveals that she saw a conductor last night, but that it was not Michel. This is highly suspicious as Michel is the only conductor on board. They go in search of the guard's uniform only to find that the murderer has hidden it in Poirot's luggage. While combing over Cassetti's belongings with book, they discover that his business details are missing. The pair see someone running with documents and burning them. Poirot pursues him and it turns out to be Mr. McQueen. He had been embezzling money from Cassetti for the past year and didn't want anyone to know. Poirot accuses him of killing Cassetti so that no one would find out, but Dr. Arbuthnot vouches for McQueen's whereabouts the night Cassetti was murdered, saying that they had been drinking all night. When Poirot questions Dr. Arbuthnot about how he and Mary know one another, the doctor gives a different account of how they met, leading to Poirot being suspicious. He also asked the doctor if he had ever known an Armstrong in the military, and the doctor says that he never knew Colonel John Armstrong. Poirot presses McQueen and finds out that he was the son of the judge who oversaw the Daisy Armstrong case. When the police were able to find a suspect, they pressured Judge McQueen to go after the maid who worked in the house. The woman was innocent, but was sentenced anyway. By the time the evidence pointed to Cassetti, the maid killed herself and Cassetti was long gone. They punished Judge McQueen and tore him apart. He was never able to recover. Poirot accuses him of killing Cassetti in revenge, but during the interrogation they hear a scream. Someone has stabbed Mrs. Hubbard in the back. The doctor rescues her, but Poirot says the killer was trying to dispose of the murder weapon and that they won't find a fingerprint. Poirot has investigated everyone except for Count Andrenii and his wife Elena. He finds out that she takes a barbital for her high anxiety, and that her real name is not Elena as it says on her passport, but Helena. She and Andrenii heard that a handkerchief with the letter H was found in the victim's room, so she sloppily altered her passport so as to not draw suspicion. Poirot figures out that Helena is actually the sister of Sonia Armstrong, but becomes increasingly suspicious when she mentions that she knows the capitals of every nation because her governess had been a stickler for geography. Andrenii attacks him and pushes him out of the room, but the professor rescues him. The professor is forced to admit that he is actually a detective with the famous Pinkerton Detective Company and that he was being paid by Cassetti to protect him. The next morning he meets with Mary and accuses her of killing Cassetti because she was Daisy's governess and at one point was Helena's. Poirot says that she invited Helena on board to share in killing Cassetti. Just then Dr. Arbuthnot intervenes and holds Poirot at gunpoint, confessing to the murder. He tells him that John Armstrong was his best friend and got him into medical school. He grazes the detective with a bullet and then begins to choke Poirot, but Book rescues him. Poirot then takes all the guests to the tunnel and announces he knows who the murderer is. He reveals that Dr. Arbuthnot is not the killer because even though he was a sharpshooter in the military, he did not kill him even at close range. He brings out the bloody and expensive handkerchief that was found at the murder scene and announces that the H would be pronounced as an N in Russian, connecting the Princess Natalie to the murder. In addition, her assistant is also involved as she was a cook at Armstrong's house. The missionary Pilar is also an accomplice as she was the nanny in the room when Cassetti took Daisy. Masterman also took part as he was Armstrong's beloved valet for many years. It is also revealed that the engineer is also involved as he was in love with the maid who was falsely accused and that the conductor Michel was her brother. Lastly, Mrs. Hubbard is actually Linda Arden, Sonia Armstrong's mother. Everyone on board wanted revenge against Cassetti and worked together to drug him and take turns stabbing him in his cabin. Poirot then says that he cannot lie and so hands the group a gun in which to kill him to keep him quiet. None accept. Finally, Linda Arden aims the gun at Poirot, only to turn it on herself. Poirot has removed all bullets from the pistol. These are not cold-blooded killers. When the train finally arrives, Poirot speaks to the authorities and tells them that Cassetti's murderer has escaped. He allows the group to go free. Upon reaching the train station, an officer informs Poirot that he is needed in Egypt as there has been a murder on the Nile and that he is needed immediately. If you like this mystery, don't forget to play our interactive true crime-inspired film. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos, click the notification bell to be notified when new films are recapped, and as always, stay sleuthy.